Today on Training Arc we're tackling Shokupan, also known as Japanese milk bread. The method for making Japanese milk bread is a little bit different compared to Western bread recipes, as we start by making something known as a Tangzhong. Into a small saucepan we're combining 30 ml or 2 tablespoons of water, 30 ml or 2 tablespoons of whole milk, and 25 grams of bread flour. Give everything in the pan a good whisking until everything is smooth and no lumps remain. Then we're placing the pan over a medium-low flame and we'll constantly stir the Tangzhong for 1 to 2 minutes or until it thickens dramatically. After a couple minutes of cooking, it should look something like this, a real sticky, wobbly boy. At this point, you can turn off the heat and let it cool down to room temperature. While the Tangzhong is cooling down, we can get started on making our dough. Into the bowl of a stand mixer, we're adding in 325 grams of bread flour, 45 grams of white sugar, 1 teaspoon or 4 grams of salt, and 2 teaspoons or 7 grams of yeast. Attach your dough hook to the mixer and then turn it on to a medium-low speed and let the dry ingredients blend together. Next we're adding in half a cup or 125 ml of warm whole milk and 1 large egg. Allow this to mix for a couple of minutes or until a shaggy dough is beginning to form, and at that point your Tangzhong should have cooled down enough that you can add that to the mixer. Let this knead over a medium-low speed for 5 minutes and the dough has become one cohesive mass. Once the dough has reached this stage, we can start adding in our butter. In total, we're going to be adding in 60 grams of unsalted softened butter, but we're going to be adding it into the dough in 3 stages. At the start of each addition, the butter won't want to mix into the dough, so you're going to need to scrape down the bowl every now and then just to make sure that it's really getting in there. Repeat this process 2 more times until all the butter has been incorporated into the dough, and then continue to knead the dough for 8 to 10 minutes on medium-low speed. During this time, you'll see that the dough will transform from a very sticky and wet looking dough into a smooth, soft and elastic dough that feels tacky but won't stick to your hands. Once the dough has reached that stage, we can remove it from the stand mixer, and now we can roll this guy up into a smooth, taut ball. To achieve this, we're cupping our dominant hand and pulling the dough towards us in a clockwise motion. Repeat this cupping and pulling motion maybe like 10 times and then it'll be smooth and round like baby's bottom. What the hell was that? Then we're going to lightly oil a large bowl before gently transferring in our dough, covering it with a clean tea towel, and like any other yeast leavened dough, we're letting this rest for at least 1 hour in a warm place or until it's doubled in size. After an hour and a half, we can remove the tea towel and see that our dough boy has gotten real chonky. Now, it's been a little while since we've done this on the channel, so let me just mentally and physically prepare myself as we ever so gently cradle our dough before punching all the air out of it. You don't have to be as violent as I am, but knock back the dough to remove all the excess air, and then we're going to dust our work surface with a light coating of flour before turning out the dough, and then lightly sprinkle the top of the dough with a little bit more flour. Then if you want to make this loaf look like a typical Shokupan, you can weigh the dough out and get slightly freaked out that it weighs exactly 666 grams. But to be fair, I'd probably sell my soul for a good loaf of bread anyway, so it's all good. Getting back on track, we're going to divide the dough up into 2 or 3 equal portions, and then with a piece of the portioned out dough, we're going to roll it out using our rolling pin until the dough is 30 centimeters in length and 15 centimeters in width. Then we're folding in one side of the dough until it reaches the center, and taking the other side of the dough and folding it over the other 2 layers to make a square with 3 layers of overlapping dough. Turn the folded dough 90 degrees so that the fold lines are parallel to your body, and then you want to roll the dough so that it looks like a Swiss roll. Make sure that the top is nice and smooth by using a gentle cupping and pulling motion like I'm doing here, and then repeat this process with your remaining dough. Transfer the rolled dough into a well-oiled loaf pan, ensuring that the seam is facing downwards and that you also leave a little bit of space between each roll. Cover this with a tea towel and allow the dough to rise in a warm area for 1 hour or until the top of the dough is just beginning to peek over the lip of the pan. Now, because it was quite cool in my house, this took about 90 minutes, but your dough should look something like this when the towel is removed. Then before this goes into the oven, we're going to generously brush the top of the loaf with an even layer of whole milk. Ensure to fully brush down the surface without leaving any dry spots, otherwise the top of the loaf won't have a consistent golden brown color after baking. Finally, we're transferring this into an oven preheated to 180 degrees Celsius or 165 degrees fan forced, and baking the loaf for 35 to 40 minutes, and a beautiful golden brown color has been achieved. After 35 minutes, our loaf is ready to come out of the oven, and my god, does it look thick. Now we're going to let the loaf cool off in the pan for about 10 minutes, during which time, if you want to give your loaf that typical Asian bakery shininess to it, brush down the top of the loaf with some melted unsalted butter. Much like the milk wash from earlier, make sure to apply the butter evenly so that the shine of the bread will look consistent across the entire top of the loaf. Then after 10 minutes of cooling, we can remove the loaf from the pan. If the pan was well oiled, it should slip right out, but if you want to be extra cautious like me, feel free to run a butter knife along the edges of the pan first before removing the loaf and allowing it to cool on a wire rack for 1 hour. I know it's very tempting right now to cut into this bread while it's piping hot, but letting it cool down will allow the crumb in the bread to settle and stay fluffier. Plus, this is a pretty soft bread, so you may find that it's a bit more difficult to cut this loaf when it's still hot. Now, luckily, I had to duck out of the house for a job interview while this was cooling down, so this didn't feel like the longest hour of my life, but your results may vary. Now it's time for us to reap the rewards of our efforts and see how this bread turned out. A moment of silence please as we look at this cross section. There are a few things in the world that hit the spot like how a loaf of freshly baked bread does, so let's just get into it. Japanese milk bread is pretty versatile, so you can use it in both savoury or sweet applications, which is why for one of my slices I'm just spreading over some salted butter, and onto the other slice I'm spreading over some Nutella. Now let's see how we did. And I've got to say, if you haven't made much bread before, I'd highly suggest giving this recipe a try. The process for making Japanese milk bread is pretty standard apart from the inclusion of making a Tangzhong, but it's that Tangzhong that helps make this bread that much fluffier and softer, meaning that you can achieve quite a soft crumb that, in the best possible way, is very reminiscent of store-bought white bread. The bread itself is buttery, lightly sweet, and works well as a bread to be eaten on its own, turn it into French toast, or maybe making some Japanese style sandwiches with it. Hint hint for a future video. As always guys, thanks so much for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, let me know by dropping a like down below and let me know what skills, techniques and recipes you want to see in the future. Subscribe to the channel for a new episode every single week, and when you're ready for another power up, I'll be waiting for you right here for our next training arc. Peace.